serious concerns about Mr. Muscat staying in office. We have, let's say, concerns about the integrity of the murder investigation. Of course, everybody is innocent until proven guilty, but there are just, in the period, the next 40 days are going to be crucial for the murder investigation. And we don't want any risk, or even a perceived risk, which is just as serious, that the investigation may be compromised in any way. There has to be absolute confidence in the process, and I think when he is in office, that confidence is not there. And I think confidence, not just of the Maltese citizens, but also of the European Union, because I underline again that Malta is part of the European Union, and as such also of the area of freedom, security and justice. On the murder investigation, we have seen in recent days, in particular the past week, that progress is being made, important progress has been made, which we welcome. That is a step in the direction of truth and justice. However, we still have concerns over, let's say, threats to the integrity of the process. We have grave concerns over the fact that other investigations that should urgently be conducted into corruption, money laundering, and investigations which are clearly connected to the murder case, those investigations have either not started or they are not being they're not being conducted very vigorously. There we have very serious concerns. Then some other things that have struck us over the last couple of days, so not just, let's say, the politics and the institutional issues, but we get very worrying signals about the safety of journalists, also other people's, but also that the livelihood of, and therefore the independence of journalists is under threat. There are threats to the right of peaceful demonstration. And I can say this personally to you, because I've made the same remark 15 months ago when we were here. I'm very annoyed to see that the hate campaign against certain people, in particular the family of Daphne Caruana Galizia, has not stopped, and it has to stop. There is also the issue of reforms, constitutional reforms. We note that the process has been set in motion, the reforms that have been suggested by the Venice Commission that was invited last year at our suggestion. And it is vital that these reforms are implemented quickly and fully. And you have probably also seen that the new European Commission attaches particular importance to that issue. Then we have also noticed that this is not just about political institutions, it's also about a political culture, and we get the feeling that the bipartisan system leads to a bipartisan culture which has become almost toxic, and that is something that needs to be addressed. Then finally, the role of the European Union in all this. We have been monitoring the situation in Malta for 2 years now. And as I said, many of our concerns have not been allayed. So we will continue the monitoring exercise. You will probably know in 2 weeks' time there's going to be a public debate in the European Parliament that will most likely be wound up by a resolution. But we will also immediately, upon return, write to the new von der Leyen Commission and remind her of our urgent request in our March resolution to immediately start a dialogue within the rule of law framework with Malta. And this is particularly urgent, and we call on the Commission to start that exercise immediately, because the next 40 days, as I said, are essential to the murder investigation and the other investigations, to the integrity of the process. This Parliament was able to organize a mission within 2 days, I believe. So I think the Commission, which has considerably more means, can do so immediately, and they could be here, this week even. We would also argue, we would also write to to the Council, that is the heads of government, who are scheduled to come together, I believe, 10 days from now, and they've been conspicuously silent so far, but 10 days from now, the Prime Minister of this country will be sitting at that table with the other 27 leaders. So I think, they have to take position before that Council meeting. And finally, I think one other small point I would like to stress is the importance of the presence of Europol, and they should get full access to all the relevant investigations and really, witness from minute to minute what is going on. I think that everybody recognizes they've played a very positive and important role, and in the next 40 days in particular, that is of the essence. That's all I have to say so far, so thank you very much. Who is going to... You're moderating? Sorry? You're moderating? Okay.
In Virginia team. So we now know that the Prime Minister Joseph Muscat has been exchanging messages with the prime suspect in the assassination of Daphne Murder, the prime suspect, Mr. Jürgen Fenech. He was mentioned in the investigations, and after he was being mentioned in the investigation, Mr. Fenech, the Prime Minister was still exchanging messages with this suspect. We have also the Prime Minister who had his ex-chief of staff, Mr. Keachkambi, who is connected to Mr. Jürgen Fenech. But we have the Prime Minister and Mr. Keachkambi who are not being investigated by the police. Do you still stand by the statement that was given yesterday to the media that the police are doing a serious and professional job in solving this case?
Well, to start with the last one, no, I'll start with the first point. The kind of news that you're referring to, and reports like this have been coming out every day. Every day we hear a little bit more, there are more revelations, and it has only added to our concerns about the continued presence of Mr. Muscat in the office of the Prime Minister in connection with the investigation. It's actually quite remarkable that he's had very substantial access to information on the investigation, and not just him, also Mr. Schembri. With regard to the second point, I would like to reiterate what I just said. Yes, we are positive about elements of the investigation, but we also still have concerns. It's neither completely black nor completely white. I also think we need to recognize that any police force anywhere will always struggle a little bit with the balance between the need for transparency and the need for discretion. But we will, let's say, we recognize that there is certainly a willingness to investigate, and should that willingness fade, or are there people who are not, let's say, being constructive and helpful, and I'm being diplomatic, that is the very reason why we are really staying on top of this as much as we can. We will be following, almost on a day-to-day basis. Incidentally, I would also like to, if any of the colleagues want to come in, please don't hesitate. Next question.
I have a question for Ms. Sippel. In terms of the SND, the Social Democrats, what kind of pressure is being mounted on the Labour Party that's a member of your group to take serious action to remove the Prime Minister from office?
Okay.
Just lean over a bit.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I think it's without any doubt that there is pressure both on the Labour Party here in Malta and also, of course, on the Socialists back in Brussels. And I think what we more and more see in these days during this visit, that unfortunately it's not that important what we believe what Mr. Muscat is doing or not doing, but the trust is totally destroyed. And if the trust is destroyed, you may like it or not, you might say it's unfair or not, but in such a situation, I think you have to take action. You can't simply continue as if nothing is happening. That's my statement for the time being. It's my personal statement because I haven't yet checked with my group. But I think we all agree that in such a critical situation where emotions are rising and situation is becoming toxic, a change is needed. And I would only like to add another point that we also exchanged today with different groups that we met, that yes, the Prime Minister has to leave office, but the situation in Malta, unfortunately, will not turn to the best immediate that day. And it will not only be enough to change the government, all those steps might be necessary, but I think we also together need to find ways to bring the society in Malta together, back again, so to create a new situation for cooperation. But, coming back to your first statement, the situation is very difficult and activity needs to be taken, and it should be taken fast by the Prime Minister.
Hello. I have two questions. What's the way forward when it comes to this report and the European institutions? And the second question would be what kinds of repercussions there could be in Malta when it comes to this report and its relationship with the European Union, for example. Would this affect the new EU budget with regards to Malta and deal, which is currently being negotiated right now?
Well, you know, what will be repercussions? Look, Malta is very firmly embedded in the European Union, okay? And I always say we're all Europeans, we're in this together. At the same time, everybody also has to abide by the same rules and the same standards. Because if part of the European Union is somehow compromised, then the whole European Union is compromised. Even in very practical ways in terms of police and justice cooperation. But I think it is not, basically it's not in our hands, it's in the hands of the government to decide, you know, how the relationship with the European Union is. If they want to be an influential and respected member of the European Union, then they have to abide by the same rules and standards, as I said. But it's in the hands of the government, and they will have to show that they are a credible partner. And I think, look, let's be clear here, I make the distinction very specifically between the government or even parts of governments and the country and the people, because they are different things. Okay?
Sophia, can I add something?
Yes.
What we think is that Malta deserves better. This administration it's connected with corruption and a crime. This administration must leave. But we do believe that the real image of Malta is not the image of this administration. The real image of Malta is the image of Daphne Caruana Galizia, her courage, her bravery to challenge the corruption and to tell the truth. And we must stick to that image.
Next question. Up there.
No? You said that this was had concerns about the Prime Minister staying in office until yesterday, and you said that the Malta police was running a professional job. Also, Europe has been a part of the investigations. Do you have faith in Europe to deliver in these investigations?
Do I have faith in Europol? Yes, I have faith in Europol, but they're not doing it alone. They're not in charge of the investigation. That's not the way it works. Europol is invited by national police forces to provide, let's say, assistance, all kinds of assistance, but they do not have operational powers, so they do not themselves conduct the investigation, but I find it reassuring that they are closely involved, very closely involved, and they've stepped up their involvement again in recent weeks. So I have confidence in them, yes.
How do you spoke of the European Commission and the Council, how do you interpret their silence on the issue? Because the Commission has been saying on and on, we're following the case very closely, but I don't see any strong position.
Yeah, well,
especially now with this information.
It's the magical phrase the Commission always uses for everything. We're monitoring closely. But no, look, the new Commission has been in office, 4 days now? The previous Commission clearly completely ignored Malta. Completely. The new Commission clearly seems to take a keener interest. We have seen that Commissioner Jourova has made reference to the situation in Malta. I believe she had or will have a meeting with the Justice Minister, and we will press the Commission as much as we can to be bolder, quicker, and stand by their words, because they're always talking a lot about the rule of law. But when it comes down to it, they're often too timid. So I hope that this new Commission that has just made a new start is going to be much more active and assertive in this. And we will, in our communication to the Commission, we will stress very much the need to act immediately, not after a procedure of many weeks and months. No, immediately. There is this 40-day period, and that is crucial, because if the Commission is going to be too reticent, too timid, and if in that 40-day period, the investigation will be tampered with, if evidence disappears, if guilty people escape, will we ever be able to forgive ourselves? Are we going to refer back to, I don't know, treaty articles or, I think it is essential for everybody that justice is done, and the Commission will have to choose. Is it going to be bureaucratic and technocratic, or is it actually going to stand by the side of the people and show that the European Union is truly a community of values and a community of law?
May I add something on this? I don't know if there's a mic.
Is there a mic somewhere? Yeah.
Thank you. I think the fact that we are here with this delegation is also a very clear and powerful sign from the European Union to say that these fundamental values regarding press freedom are still important for Europe. Of course, one cannot kill a journalist. Killing a journalist is like starving democracy. It's actually bigger than just going to committing random crimes. It's admitting that there is something fundamentally wrong. The goal of our presence here is to check and see what is going on in Malta, control whether the rule of law is prevailing, and then go back and report on that with facts and advocate for next steps. And this is what we are going to do. We need to go through this process. I think what we have been watching, seeing, and hearing here, I must say that I am very much in shock and flabbergasted. Honestly, I never knew that when I was growing up in a little village in Africa, I would one day sit in European Parliament and experience what I'm experiencing now in one member of the European Union. So there is something we need to defend, because when the press is not free, you cannot have politicians who are accountable, and you cannot have a democracy that is functioning. So we're going to report honestly on that. We met a lot of people, we listened to everyone, we also met the family, and I think, I speak also for my colleagues here, I will never forget the heartbreaking pain that you could see in the two sons of Daphne and her husband. Soon will be Christmas. This mother and wife will not go home to hug her loved ones. And also, it's actually stabbing the press here in Malta. And what you have been going through, we saw that there is a lot of intimidation of journalists. This cannot be continuing, and it's not going to be supporting. So we're going to do our work, and we will do what we can to move on, but we also have democratic processes to follow, but this is being taken very seriously. So this is part of what you asked me as a question.
I'll just add a little bit. It's difficult to be in this situation from Malta and listening to what has been said. We have been clear that Joseph Muscat must leave immediately if this investigation is to have any credibility. And to move on to what comes next, we need to work on rule of law mechanism that would look at this country objectively, that would see the role that a European Union member state has to have in such a union, and to bridge the gap between the values that we fought so hard for, that we are so proud to have, and the tools that are available to protect them.
One last remark. You know, corruption has no party affiliation and integrity has no party affiliation. So I think we would really like to appeal to all politicians here, regardless of their party affiliation, to consider very carefully what their responsibility is for this country, for justice, and also for our common European Union.
What you have just said a bit earlier, do you think that there is from your meetings, from the people you've been meeting, from the meetings with the Prime Minister and the authorities, do you think there exists a real threat to evidence actually going missing in this 40-day period?
If I believe there's an interest in evidence going missing?
Not a real threat.
Risk.
Risk. Look, you know, if you're talking about a risk or a fear, then by definition you cannot prove it. But the fact that we are raising that means that, yes, we fear there is a risk. And even if it's only a perceived risk, then, you know, that completely undermines trust. And trust is really, okay, you cannot express trust in figures. You cannot measure it. It's not tangible. But it is the core ingredient of the democratic rule of law. And it sounds corny maybe, but it's true. And if people have no trust in the institutions anymore, if people have no trust in the processes anymore, or in the police investigation, if people don't know whom to believe anymore, you know, then distrust grows amongst the population, between people. It's devastating. So I think even if the risk were just perceived, and I believe it is a real risk, but even if it were just perceived, I think that would be sufficient reason for a responsible politician to say, okay, if I stand between trust, or if I'm an obstacle to trust, then I draw my conclusions and I leave.
Can I add something? During the last 2 years after the assassination of Daphne Caruana Galizia, there's been a constant denial from the part of the government to proceed with finding out what happened with the crime. There was denial. There was denial of the public inquiry. There was hate speech against the family of Daphne. There was a propaganda. So all those elements, after the discovery there were relations between the Prime Minister, Chief of Staff, and the perpetrators, makes very important for this administration to leave the police and the justice free to do their jobs. And we have, for this reason, we have a base to say that we cannot trust this administration and this office of the Prime Minister to continue staying in power, because we are afraid that some elements will be destroyed, some evidence will be destroyed.
Mr. Berg?
Thank you very much. I would like to refer to the question from the gentleman to the left in regards to the repercussions. As the investigation into the murder of Mrs. Caruana Galizia is moving ever closer into the heart of the government, the lack of the support of the people of Malta for their government, and the alarming threats we are hearing in regards to infringement of freedom of press, threats towards journalists, I do fear that the current revelations will have a very bad influence on the reputation of Malta, especially in regards to business and commerce.
Too late. Okay. Any other quick question? Oh, I see 3, 4. Okay, we're not out of here yet. I see the gentleman in the back first.
Moment. Wait for the micro.
Members of Daphne's family often describe Malta as a mafia state, and they're not alone in that assessment. Do you agree with that view, or disagree, and why?
Look, you'd really like me to say that now, eh? Yeah. I mean,
No.
look.
No.
The point is. I think the purpose of our visit here is to make sure that things get back on the right track, and I don't think we would help the process along, by giving qualifications of that kind to the media. But it is very clear that there are very severe concerns over the rule of law. And I think, the reaction of my colleagues here speaks for itself. I've been here before, Roberta Metsola as well, of course, on the delegation, Sven Giegold, who's not here now. But we have a couple of new members on the delegation who I think were really shocked by what they saw. So, our concerns, yes, are very grave. At the same time, I think there are also lots of people of goodwill in this country that we want to support in getting things back on the right track. But there's a lot to do.
Can I add something? The thing that there are mafiosi, that don't mean that this is a mafia state. No. We have mafiosi almost everywhere.
Yeah. We are not Joseph Muscat.
True. No. Okay. That was your question. Okay.
I'll just add something on, because the question was also about
No. Yes, I have no microphone.
Ivan from Al Jazeera. Just following on from that question, it feels like the longer us journalists spend here, the more we start to realise that allegations of corruption, criminality permeate every sector of society, whether it be the judiciary, the police, politics. I'm wondering what the immediate stepping down of the Prime Minister will mean long term. Because what the protesters are talking about is structural change, not cosmetic change.
No, but I think any calls for the resignation of the Prime Minister, nobody's implying that immediately the problem of corruption would be solved, because, as I said before, very clearly, corruption has no party affiliation. It's not even connected to one person. However, the acute risk, during this 40-day period where he will still be there, with the Parliament suspended, okay, so nobody looking over his shoulder, the acute risk for the integrity of the murder investigation, I think, is a big concern for us. So that is, I think, that is more apart from all the other reasons why somebody who is the Prime Minister of a country that got to this point, should draw his conclusions. And the Parliament as well. They said at the start, because some people we met had the impression that we were going to somehow force him or something. It's in the hands of the Parliament here, and they have to realise what they're responsible for. But we signal that there is a big risk to the integrity of the investigation, and that in turn, if it has ramifications. The way the rule of law functions or doesn't function in Malta has direct implications for the position of Malta in the European Union. And we have mechanisms, we have all sorts of mechanisms to deal with such a situation, but I think it would be advisable to not get there. We don't want to get there.
I would like to add something very short. I already indicated, and I think we all agree, that resignation of the Prime Minister at what point ever now is necessary, but of course in the best case ever can only be a very small first step. And when someone is asking if Malta is a mafia country, I won't agree with that. But nevertheless, the problem is bigger than linked to one or the other person. To that extent, I'm happy that we had meetings also today, that steps are going on very slowly, but steps are going on to implement the recommendations from Venice Commission. There is also a working group to change the constitution. And I will come back to what Sophie Infeld at the beginning said. This is a process that we carefully have to follow to ensure that all these changes then will be done. And I think that's also the question, what will happen after a resignation of a Prime Minister, with all the people who are engaged in society, with all the demonstrations. How will they continue to do their job to also support the changes that we hopefully together are willing to follow on? So it will be a long turn to change and come back to a good situation in Malta, but we have to make a starting point now.
Just one sentence. I mean, we are not corrupt. We are not the mafia. And what we are definitely not is Joseph Muscat or Keith Schembri.
Okay, Asita, briefly.
I just want to come back to the question regarding what family says. I think in any case, we must always acknowledge the legitimate pain of the family. And if there was no corruption, if there was no crime, if there was no injustice, and if there was freedom of press, Daphne would be alive. And the family would still have their wife and mother at home. So this is a fact we always need to take into account. And second, but last thing, I think we should just take one thing in consideration. My profound belief is that it is to Prime Minister Muscat himself now to look really in the mirror and decide whether he is the right person today to bring Malta to a situation where justice exists for Daphne and to a situation where the rule of law is prevailing, and answer honestly to that question.
Thank you. I think there was another question over there. Yeah.
As Abergali from the Malta Defense, as more details emerge day by day from this investigation, perhaps implying a connection between not only members of staff of the Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister himself with the main suspect. And even we heard this morning the testimony of the alleged middleman who said that he got a job from the government days after the assassination was first ordered. Do you believe that besides from resigning his post immediately, the Prime Minister should also be perhaps investigated by the police?
Well, I think, look, that's for the police, but I think there are some people that should answer questions, and I think it would not be a bad idea for them to question him. Of course, there's also, I mean, I find it very hard to imagine how that worked if the Prime Minister is in an office every day with his closest confidant, Mr. Schembri. Mr. Schembri, whose name pops up, you know, in every case related to people who are in the murder case and corruption and offshore companies, Panama Papers, what have you. So what does that say about the Prime Minister? I mean, either he's been incredibly naive when all this was going on under his nose, or he was, you know, he was part of the problem. He was working together with Mrs. Schembri, or his judgment's been completely failing. But, you know, so I think it is also in his own interest then, because if he says that I've got nothing to do with everything, then maybe he should give all the information. And he's not been very generous with information on himself. Want to say something about that?
I absolutely agree.
No? I mean, you could start by maybe, you know, publishing the famous Egrant report. Any other questions, or everything is crystal clear?
Can you elaborate on the Egrant comment you just made? Why do you think it's relevant to publish the Egrant report at this stage?
Well, we've already put that in our March resolution that, you know, we feel that openness, transparency is necessary. He says he's got nothing to hide. Well, if you've got nothing to hide, publish the report. What's so difficult?
And linked to this, why has Konrad Mitzi never been questioned? So if his name also pops up in all these links, why has the police not seen fit to even bring him in for questioning once?
You was there?
Yes. No answer.
No, and the other thing is, look, I'm not a policeman, but you know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that Daphne Caruana Galizia was exposing things about people, powerful and rich people, and very, 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 very corrupted people, and they didn't like it, and that's why she was killed. You know, corruption kills, quite literally. So how logical would it be to you know, to look for the culprit completely outside the circle of people that that she was aiming her arrows at? I mean, they were the people who had something to lose because of you know, what she exposed. And so look at the list of names, and indeed it's quite striking that somebody like Mr. Schembri apparently is not really that much on the radar screen. He's been interrogated a couple of times. But I mean, there are a lot of alarm bells around this person. And again, you know, there's always the presumption of innocence. But if the presumption of innocence means that there is no action, then the presumption of innocence ultimately doesn't lead to justice, it leads to injustice. Because if we use the presumption of innocence in a very rigid, mechanic way, then it means that the guilty people will get away. That can never be justice. You know, presumption of innocence is part of the rule of law. It's part of our justice system. But if you use it in the wrong way, then it leads to injustice.
If I may, in this particular case in Malta, and what you can see where press is not free, you can say that this is continuing for what we have learned and heard also from the working conditions of a lot of journalists here. It's very much high pressure on the press here, and this intimidation is going on. So it's just one journalist has been assassinated, but in this exact moment, a lot of journalists are still being intimidated, and which is actually continuing to diminish the freedom of the press. So I believe, and we all agree on that, that the European Union should keep a very high pressure here.
Protection of journalists.
Okay, one last question. Oh, yeah, Mr. Berg.
I would like to raise your attention to another important issue, apart from all the important issues we have so far discussed. Malta remains near the top of the list for money laundering, tax evasion, and selling passports to wealthy third parties. And I truly believe that this spells a threat not only to the national security of Malta, but also to the security of 27 other member states. And this is a very, very serious issue.
Yeah. I think it's maybe useful to mention that the European Parliament has taken position on the so-called golden passports repeatedly, calling for an outright ban, and if not an outright ban, then at least regulates very strictly. And we expect the European Commission to issue, issue a report with, you know, let's say, preliminary proposals and ideas on this in December. It's not an easy topic because it's strictly national competence, the issuance of passports. But I think member state governments should also take their responsibility now and recognize that golden passports are a threat to the security and the integrity of the European Union, of Schengen, of the internal market, and even our democratic system. Because it brings in people, we have the example of a New Zealand businessman who bought a Maltese passport, and then as an EU citizen he was allowed to fund the Brexit campaign. Okay, whether you're in favour of Brexit or against doesn't really matter. We don't want people, you know, coming into the European Union that way and tamper with our democracy. Any other burning issues? Otherwise, we conclude on this.
Yep. Something on the passport thing. I think having a European passport is actually committing to something. You know, when in the Netherlands, when you become Dutch, you have to go and say and swear that you're going to respect the constitution and all the laws that are going. When I became Belgian, I did not have the opportunity to swear for that, but in my heart, I committed to be faithful to my new identity, and to respect it, to protect it, and to not take only the rights that go with it, but also the responsibilities. And this is something that is connected to our way of doing things and of living life in the EU. So when people join us, this must be taken seriously. When you join this identity club, you need to take it seriously. It should not become like something you can just go and buy. Otherwise, it will have no value anymore.
Hear, hear. Okay, thank you all very much.
Habit.
Maybe they've got better things to do. Oui, mais très rapidement, parce que je dois partir en 5 minutes. Et il y avait un autre journaliste. Je sais. Can you
Sure.